How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Beis, Daf 102. It's unbelievable. I get such a kick out of saying 100, 101, 102. I'm telling you, this is like the biggest accomplishment ever, the biggest pride to have learned 100 pages of Masechtas Zevachim. Can you imagine? Page 102 of Masechtas Zevachim. Mind blown. We broke 100 pages of Zevachim. We broke 100 pages of Zevachim. 100 pages of Zevachim did not break us. No way. It only strengthened our resolve. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. 102 pages of Zevachim. Wow. Okay. Gewaltige Daf today. We're going to discuss whether Moses was the high priest and or the king. Very, very interesting discussion. That's going to be the first chunk of today's daf. We'll discuss blemished priests, right? Baal mumins, blemished priests, receiving sacrifice portions. Right? Blemished Kohanim receiving portions of sacrifices. There'll be a little bit of chazar from daf, what was it, Tzadi Test? And finally, Tvul Yom's attempting to receive sacrifice portions. A Tvul Yom, of course, is unable to eat kachim until the night. Of course, assuming that they won't then be a Mechusar Kippurim, that would be for Mitzorah Zav, but assuming that they're not Mitzoras or Zavs. So that night they will be able to be Korbanos. So here we're going to learn all about a Tvul Yom trying to convince his fellow priest that, hey, give me some of your korban so I can eat it tonight. And we're going to see his attempts at arguing his case for why he should be given, why he should be thrown a bone. Okay, Chaver, that is what we have on the agenda here for today. Daf Kuf Beis of Masechtas Zevachim. Let us get to work. Friends, we're going to begin on Daf Kuf Aleph Amid Beis, 3 lines before it gets wide. Amar Rav, says Rav, Moshe Rabbeinu Kohen Gadol Hoya v'cholik b'kodesh Shamayim Hoya. Ho. Says Rav that Moshe Rabbeinu was the Kohen Gadol, was the high priest, and he ate from korbanos. Shenemar, as the apostle says, by the miluim. Of course, we learned, I think it was yesterday, we were discussing the miluim and what they were, the 7 days prior to the Akomas HaMishkan, from Chav Gimel Be'adar, at the end of the first year in the desert. For those 7 days, Moshe Rabbeinu set up the Mishkan, took down the Mishkan. He was the Kohen. He did all of the he offered all the korbanos during that period. And it says then, Me'ela miluim leMoshe oya lemono, that Moshe Rabbeinu chaptaran from the ram of the miluim, which I believe was a shlomim. Meisvei, we have a contradiction, however. Valo Pinchis hoyo imoen. Chev, if you remember, I think it was yesterday. I don't remember what's what anymore. It was yesterday. So yeah. There was a suggestion. Well, there was a question. Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon asked against Reb Nechemia. Reb Nechemia, how can you say that the reason why the Chatos Rosh Chodesh was burnt instead of eaten was because they were owning him? Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon, however, asked, just because they're onins, maybe they wouldn't have eaten it, but they could have given it to Pinchas to eat. So, frankly, Gemara, if Moshe Rabbeinu was ochit a kohen, they could have suggested you could have given it to Pinchas or to Moshe. Why was Moshe left out of the equation? Meaning, if he's a kohen, if in fact he's a kohen, then the suggestion should have also been that the kohen, the chatas could have been given to Moshe himself to eat instead of burnt. If it's correct that Moshe Rabbeinu was the high priest, they should have asked that the meat could have been given to Moshe Rabbeinu. Why did they have to burn it? Dilma shayini Moshe the Torah b'shchina. Maybe Moshe Rabbeinu is different because he's so busy with the Rabbanei Shalom, he's so involved and so consumed with the Rabbanei Shalom, he's not available to just be given chatas to be eating. He's busy with the Rabbanei Shalom all the time. Moshe Bashkama Ola Bashkama Yored. By Maimed Har Sinai, it says that Moshe Rabbeinu every day, was it? Bashkama Ola Bashkama Yored. He would very early go up and down from the mountains, liaising between the Rabban Shalom and Am Yisrael. But I think the point is that, early in the morning, every opportunity, as soon as he can, whatever opportunity he had, he would be with the Rabban Shalom. And therefore, to suggest that why don't you just give the chatas to Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu is busy, he's not available, he's with the Rabban Shalom. So therefore they suggest, why not give it to Pinchas? Meisvei, however, we have a question. Lechem Eloikov mikotcha kochim minakochim yoicha. The pasuk says by a Baal Mum, a kohen who's a Baal Mum. It says Lechem Eloikov, that the breads of the Rabban Shalom, i.e. korbanis, mikotcha kochim. Whether we're talking about kochim kochim, chatos meat, for example, umina kochim, or even kochim kalim, like the chazev ashok, right? Those are the parts of the shlomim, for example, that go to the kohanim. A kohen who's a Baal Mum can participate, can eat from kochim kalim. Yochel, he can eat them. Imnemu kochim kochim, lama nemu kochim kalim, vimnemu kochim kalim, lama nemu kochim kochim. Why did the pasuk need to write that the Baal Mum, kohen who's a Baal Mum, can consume meat from kochim as well as the parts that go to the kohanim for kochim kalim? The answer, why do we need both? The answer is ilu lo nemru kochim kalim. If it didn't say kochim kalim, if it only said kochim, hayisi omer, I would say kochim. The reason why Baalei Mumin, if I say Baalei Mumin, I'm talking about Kohanim Baalei Mumin. The reason why Baalei Mumin can eat kochim is because hu du ochel sharei hutru lezar v'lohen, because kochim are permitted to non-Kohanim as well as to them, to Baalei Mumin. So since kochim are permitted to non-Kohanim, we're going to have to explain what does it mean that kochim are permitted to non-Kohanim. But anyways, since kochim is permitted to a zar, to a non-Kohen, and it's also permitted to them. However, kochim kalim, the chazev ashok, the breast and the thigh of a korban shlamim, for example, where do we have any indication that is ever allowed to anyone other than a healthy kohen? Kochim kalim lo yochel. However, when it comes to kochim kalim, where we have no other precedent to say that the chazav ashok of a kochim kalim should be eaten by anyone other than a healthy kohen, so maybe the Baal Mum would not eat from kochim kalim, the chazav ashok of kochim kalim. So therefore, the pasuk had to say umina kochim, i.e. kochim kalim, the Baalei Mumim eat from that as well. V'ilu lo nemru kochim. And if it didn't say kochim kalim, wait, what? Where am I? No, did I skip? Well, I don't know. I don't know what I did. Where is it? Okay. So kochim kalim lo yochel ve'ilu lo nemru kochim. And if it didn't, so if it only said kochim kalim, okay, great, yeah. Now, if it only said kochim kalim, okay, so to say that Baalei Mumim can eat kochim kalim, i.e. the chazav ashok of kochim kalim, hayisi omer, I would say, v'kochim kalim yehei ochel she'ein kalim. I would say, okay, they can eat kochim kalim because they are kochim kalim. They are less stringent. They are more lenient kochim. The kochim lo yehei ochel. However, kochim, which are more stringent, they wouldn't eat, just from the nature of them being kochim, more stringent korbanos. So l'chach nemru kochim v'lechach nemru kochim kalim. Sheesh. Wow. Okay, that was a little bit of a brain mess. But anyways, just to remember what's what. But anyways, the Gemara proved, the Brisa proved its point, that the pasuk has to say kochim and has to say kochim kalim. It can't just say one of them. However, friends, in the argument for why it had to say kochim kalim, it mentioned that, well, kochim are permitted to a zar as well as to Baalei Mumin. Who is this zar that kochim are permitted to? Katonimia sharei hutru lizar, that koche kochim are permitted to a non-kohen. Vilahen, as well as to Bali Mumin. So my zar adds those two words. Who is the zar that koche kochim were allowed to? Lab Moshe. Are we not talking about Moshe Rabbeinu? That during the Miluim, Moshe Rabbeinu was allowed to eat from Korbanis. And we're calling him a zar, a non-kohen. So how could Rav say that Moshe Rabbeinu was the high priest? Aren't we calling him a non-priest? A zar? Or Mavsheshes lo? No. The zar that we are talking about is not Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu, you could say, was the high priest. Who's the zar we're talking about? Bibama. On a bama. On a bama. On a private altar that somebody makes in their backyard. And like the opinion who says that you can offer a flower offering on a private altar. So meaning, so if you have during of course, assuming that it's during a period that you're permitted, that private altars are sanctioned, are allowed. So assuming that private altars are allowed, you set up an altar in your backyard, assuming that you could bring a mincha offering, a flower offering. Now a flower offering is a kacheh kachin, right? And generally a flower offering, a kometz would be burnt on the mizbeach, the rest would go to the kohanim and they would eat it in the azar. So if you say that flower offerings can be offered on private altars, and you can have non-kohanim taking a handful, burning it on the mizbeach, and then the rest, they will eat. Non-kohanim will eat. So you could say that what's the reference to the kacheh kachim that are being eaten by azar? You could say it's talking about a korban mincha that is being eaten on a bama, rather than to say that it's talking about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the high priest. I thought that when I would say Lizar, I would give a shout out to our friend Yanki Lizar, but I forgot to do it, so I'm doing it now. How you doing, Yanki? I am going to drink a little coffee. Drinking coffee or really anything these days is tricky. I always have to make sure I have a napkin with me because it gets in my mustache. I basically have a filter in front of my mouth, which is very good. It's good to have a filter in front of your mouth. But I haven't had a mustache this long in a while, like 10 years. It's a tricky thing, but it's a great thing. Okay. Where are we? Meisvei. We question our premise that Moshe Rabbeinu was the high priest once more. Miriam, Miyasgira. Miriam, of course, we know got Saras. Where was that? At the end of Parshas? What Parsha was that at the end of? I don't remember. The end of one of the Parshas. Anyways, Miriam gets Saras. The shaila is, who was the Kohen who was kind of being mitapel with her? Meaning, we learned already back in Masechta Megillah, that's just right, Ein bein mitzora muskar and mitzora muchlat, for example. That there are mitzora muskar and mitzora muchlat. Basically, when a person says, Dag nabbit, I might have tsaras, so they have to go to Huvel HaKohen. You have to go to the priest. Now, the priest will have a look, we'll check it out, and if he can't determine whether it's tsaras or not, he will say, okay, you need to go away for a week, let's have another look in a week. That's what's called a mitzora muskar. A mitzora who's kind of has to go away for a week and we'll have another look at him. A mitzora muchlat is a mitzora where the priest said, you definitely 100,000% have tsaras, you are a mitzora. That's a mitzora muchlat. Okay, so now, the shaila is, Miriam, Miyasgira, who checked her out to see if she had tsaras? Tema, im tomar, Moshe is Gira. Moshe checked her out. Moshe Zar, how could Moshe have checked her out? He's a Zar. It's not a Kohen. Ve'ein Zar, Reyes HaNegoyim. A non-Kohen can't inspect Negoyim, Tsaras. If you're talking about Aharon, he's Gira. If you say Aharon checked her out, Aharon Karvu. Aharon is a relative. Ve'ein Karv, Reyes HaNegoyim. A relative cannot inspect Negoyim, Tsaras. Elo, Kovid Gadol Chalak La Kadosh Baruch Hu LeMiriam, Osa Shua. The Rabbeinu Shalom gave to Miriam a big kavod. Omar Ani Kohen. The Rabbeinu Shalom says, I'm a priest. Va'ani Masgira, I'm going to inspect her. Ani Cholta, I will determine if she has tsaras. Right, and meaning I will say that she has tsaras. Definitively Va'ani Potra, and I will ultimately also release her when she no longer has tsaras. Katoni Mias Moshe Zar Vein Zaros and Agayim. In that very interesting brisa, we mentioned that Moshe Rabbeinu could not have checked out his sister Miriam because he is a non-Kohen. So we see he was certainly not, therefore, the high priest. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, shiny Maris Negayim. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, no. Specifically, when it comes to tsaras, the Aharon Uvan of Ksubim B'Parsha, it specifically says, Ve'huva el Aharon o Echad Mibanav HaKohanim, something like that, i.e., tsaras needs to be checked out by Aaron or one of his descendants. Therefore, even if you say that Moshe Rabbeinu was the high priest, at least with regard to checking out tsaras, he was considered a zar, since tsaras must be checked out by Aharon or any of his descendants. Meisvei, another contradiction. Chomish smachos oisa Elisheva Yisera al Benos Yisrael at the Akomas HaMishkan on the first day of Nisan, at the grand opening of the Mishkan, Elisheva, the wife of Aharon HaKohen, the sister of Nachshon ben Aminadab, she was 5 times, or in 5 ways, happier than all other women. Yivama Melech, that is because her brother-in-law, Moshe Rabbeinu, was the king. Isha Kohen, Gadol, her husband Aharon HaKohen, was the high priest. Bina, her son, Skan, was the deputy Kohen Gadol. Ben Bina, her grandson, Pinchas, Mashuach Mechama, was the Kohen Mashuach Mechama, right? And the deputy was her son, Elazar. Ve'achia, and her sister, Nisi Shevet, was the Nasi of Shevet Yehuda. However, at the same time, Va'avela al Shnei Banea, she was also in Avelis because her 2 sons, Nadav and Avihu, died. So it was quite the day for Elisheva. Katani Mias Yivama Melech. Melech in Kangadolo. So says the Gemara, well, we said in the Brisa, Elisheva was happy. It was a very happy day for Elisheva in 5 ways. One of them being that her husband Aharon was the Kohen Gadol, and her brother-in-law was not the Kohen Gadol. He was the king. So he was the king. He wasn't the Kohen Gadol. So Ema Af Melech. I'll say he was even the king. He was even the king. I think at that point he probably wasn't the high priest anymore, because Aharon was the high priest, but he was a priest and also the king. So Kitanai, we taka say it's a machlekes whether Moshe Rabbeinu was a priest or not. It says in the scenario of the burning bush, or in the period that followed the burning bush, basically when the Rabbeinu Shalom wanted Moshe to go to Egypt and negotiate with Paro and all that stuff. So Vayichar Af Hashem b'Moshe, the Rabbeinu Shalom got upset with Moses. Reb Yoshua ben Korach Omer, Kol Choron Af Shebatera. Whenever it talks about in the Torah anger, Choron Af, Nemer Bo Roshem, there's going to be some kind of a follow-up, some kind of a consequence, some kind of an insult, some kind of a something. It's never the last. That's never the final word over there. The Choron Af, the anger. There's always some kind of follow-up after the anger. V'zelu Nemer Bo Roshem, but here by the Rabbeinu Shalom getting upset with Moshe Rabbeinu while trying to convince him to go to Egypt and take the people out, it doesn't say anything about some kind of follow-up after the anger. Rav Shimon ben Yochai says, Rav Shimon ben Yochai, Av Zeh Nemer Bo Roshim, says Rav Shimon ben Yochai, no, there was a follow-up here. The follow-up is, Shenemar Halo Aharon Achicha HaLevi. that in that context it says that Aharon, your brother, the Levi, what is it? Vayikra Hashem Moshe. I'm reading the pasuk. Vayomer Halei Aharon achicha Levi yodaiti kidaber yedaber hu megam hine hu yotze lekroscha v'rachav v'samach belibo. It says Aharon is the Levi. Now one second. Valo kohen. What do you mean Aharon a kohen? The first high priest. Aharon a Levi. Why are we calling him a Levi? I'll tell you why. This is what the Rebbeinu Shalom says. Ani amarti ato kohen vu Levi. Look, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, my original plan was that you were going to be the high priest. He was going to be Aharon HaLevi. Achshav, but now, Hu Kohen V'ata Levi. You're going to be the Levi. He's going to be the priest. So we see that there was a follow-up after the anger. That follow-up was that Moses lost his priesthood and was a Levi rather than a priest. So we see here, Taka, that Moses was not a priest. He was going to be a priest, but he didn't become one. The Chacham say that Moses was a priest only during the Shivas Me'em Miluim, from Chav Gimel Adar until the grand opening of the Mishkan on Aleph Ben Nisan. V'yesham, to those who say lo paska kuna ella mizar shel Moshe, to those who say that no, Moshe Rabbeinu was a priest, his children were not, but he was. Shenemar, as the apostle says in Divrei Yomim, right. Moshe Isha Elokim, Moses, the godly man, Banav Yikaru al Shevet HaLevi, his sons will be Leviim, but he is a Kohen. Additionally, the apostle says Moshe v'Aharon that Moshe and Aharon are priests. Moshe as well. Ushmuel b'karei Shmoi, and Shmuel calling out to the Rabbeinu Shalom. Ma'va Omer, why do we need two psukim? V'chitem, if you're going to say L'doris hu dichsiv, if you're going to say, well, don't bring a rye from that pasuk in Direi Yom, because it wasn't talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, it was talking about his children. But don't infer anything about Moshe Rabbeinu himself. The pasuk there isn't talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, it's talking about his offspring. Well, V'omer, we have another pasuk nonetheless. Moshe v'Aharon b'chianav, that Moshe was ochid a kohen. V'chocharon, okay, so. Okay, so we see it's taka machlekes tanoim. Some say he was a kohen, some say he was not a kohen. V'chocharon asher b'teira nemar boy roishem. Is that really true that whenever the Torah talks about anger, there's always some kind of a follow-up, some kind of a negative follow-up, a negative consequence of sorts? The pasuk says, it says that Moses left Paroi in a huff and a puff, a chorinaf, and yet there was no follow-up. Amr Rish Lakish says, Rish Lakish, what do you mean? Mapitom, no follow-up. Sitro v'yatza. Moshe Rabbeinu gave Pare a slap. He slapped him. No follow-up. Unless you don't call a slap a follow-up. Gave him a slap. That's a follow-up. Amr Rish Lakish, Hachi, does Rish Lakish really say that Moshe Rabbeinu gave Paro a slap? The pasuk says, al svasei, or the pasuk also says that Rebbeinu Shalom says to Moshe Rabbeinu, and you will stand before Paroi at the river. I think this was early on by Dam, right? I think. V'amar Rish Lakish says that the Rebbeinu Shalom says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Melechu, that Paroi is a king, v'haz below, upon him you have to treat him with respect, says Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan takes the opposite approach. He says, Rasha uve'ez ponecha bo. No, Moshe Rabbeinu is a Rasha. Be brazen towards him. So on the one hand, Rish Lakish is saying that Moshe Rabbeinu slapped Paro. On the other hand, he's saying that the Rebbeinu Shalom also told Moshe Rabbeinu, treat Paro with respect. It's Rabbi Yochanan who says, be rough with Paro. Ipoch, so say, switch around those opinions, that it's Rish Lakish who says, be rough with Paro, and Rabbi Yochanan who says that the Rebbeinu Shalom instructed Moshe Rabbeinu to be respectful towards Paro, but Rish Lakish says that Moshe Rabbeinu was to treat Paro with a heavy hand, a heavy slap. Drink a shtick of coffee. Okay, now I gotta make sure there's no coffee in my mustache. It's a two-step process. Yeah, the mustache has gotten to the point where when I leave the house, not very often, but when I do leave the house, I gotta make sure that I have some. It's the kind of thing you gotta be prepared. Yeah, that's why the thing is, people who only have like a big mustache, they literally just reserved the most important part of the whole thing. That is the most important, but also the most annoying part of the whole thing. But mustaches are an interesting thing. All right. Amr B'yanai says Rabbi Yanai, Le'olam tehei emas malchus alecho. Says Rabbi Yanai, a person should always have the fear of the king upon him, of the kingship upon him. The Apostle says, "V'yardu kol avadecha ela ela." That Moshe Rabbeinu says to Paro, all of your servants are going to come towards me. V'ila l'didei lo kamer. He didn't say you are going to come towards me. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Me'acha says, Rabbi Yochanan from here, V'yad Hashem Oisa El Eliyahu V'yishanes Mosnov V'yarotz Lefnei Achav, that even though Achav was a shmendrik, Eliyahu nonetheless ran before him to give him kavod because he was the king. Amar Ula says, Ula, Bikesh Moshe Malchus V'lo Nosnulo. It says Ula that Moses wanted to be the king, but they didn't allow. It wasn't granted to him. Tichsiv Al tikrav halom, do not come halom. Vein halom ela malchus, and halom means kingship. Shenemar, as the apostle says, by David HaMelech, that Nosan Hanavi came and gave and presented King David with a prophecy that his children will follow him being kings for all generations. Mi'anochi Hashem Elokim v'gomer ki aviosoni ad halim. And it says there in the context of kingship and his children being kings, halim. So here it says Rava on this line twice. There are changes to Rabba and Rabba Bar Ulam. I'll go with the changes. That we were talking about two different people. Rabba asks, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Yivama Melech. Right? We had seen earlier on the page that one of the 5 happinesses of Elisheva on the inauguration of the Mishkan was that her brother-in-law was the king. Her brother-in-law being Moshe. So what do you mean Moshe wanted to be king and it wasn't granted? I thought it was granted. Whenever I think of Elisheva, my grandfather, he had a joke about Elisheva. So whenever I think of Mom, whenever you hear Elisheva, you think of that. One time, my grandfather was over at the house. My brother was wearing a yarmulke, and he had a friend over named Elisheva. So then, if my brother wasn't wearing a yarmulke, or I guess anybody wasn't wearing a yarmulke, they were called Elisheva. It is what it is. But now, when you hear Elisheva, there's an association there. Al Koponim. So Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Yivama Melech Nu. So Elisheva's brother-in-law, Moshe. Does Elisheva have there's Yair and there's Avi. No Moshe. Al Koponim. Yivama Melech Omer Ravit Lo V'Lezaru Omer. Basically what happened was Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to have a dynasty. He wanted that he would be the king and his children would continue being kings, and that was not granted. Wherever it says halom, it means dynasties. It says by Shaul halom, and he was the king, his children were not. Well, one answer is, technically his son Ishboshes was briefly king. Alternatively, shiny Shaul, it's different by Shaul. Even he didn't work out. It didn't even work out for him. He was cut short after 2 years. So a king that has a full term, and so then if it says halom, then he would be king and his children would be king. But kind of the whole thing kind of fell apart to begin with Shaul, and certainly it didn't continue on to the children. That when they decide that there's going to be greatness for an individual, poskim lo lazara atsof kol adoris, so then it is greatness for him and his seed for all generations. Shenemar lo yigra mitzadik enov ves melachim lakise, and then the pasuk continues and says, Vayoshivim la netzach, and he will sit them forever, v'yigbo, and raise them up. V'im higiz daito, but if they get haughty about it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashpilo, right, mashpil geim ade oretz, as the Nusach Sfard people say. Maybe the Sfard people too. So if they get haughty though, the Rabban Shalom throws them down. Shenemar v'im asurim bazikim yilochtun b'chavli oni, that right after it talks about how they will be raised up, it says, and they will also be tied up in shackles and in poverty and stuff. That is if they are being all, that's if they're being all haughty and everything. Not good to be haughty. The Mishnah had said that blemished priests receive sacrifice portions, right? Cholkim. What did the Mishnah say? It says, Mumin, Bali Mumin Bein, Bali Mumin Oven Bein, Bali Mumin Kvuden. I'm reading the Mishnah. Cholkin va'ochlin avalom akrivin. They receive portions of korbanos, but they can eat. They receive the portions. They can eat the portions, but they cannot do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. So now the Mishnah said Bali Mumin Bein, Bali Mumin v'chule. Says the Gemara, Minanimili. How do we know this? That Bali Mumin receive portions. The rabbis taught Kol Zocher l'Rabbos Bali Mumin. Okay, now it says essentially all male Kohanim. It says Kol Zocher B'Kohanim 3 times basically. One by Korban Mincha, one by Korban Chatas, one by Korban Shlomim, I believe. So, what does it say? Yeah, Kol Zocher. Yeah, I think the third one's by Shlomim. Anyways, it says Kol Zocher B'Kohanim 3 times. So now, so the Danu Kol Zocher, when it says all males, l'Rabbos Bali Mumin. So it includes Bali Mumin. Lemai, for what? Ila achila. If we're talking about to say that, well, Bali Mumin can eat korbanos. Havik vaynemar lechem elakav mikotche akachim yoichel. Right? We saw this pasuk earlier on today that it says by Bali Mumin that they can eat kachim kal. We had that whole discussion. El lechaluka. What this pasuk is teaching is that Bali Mumin also receive portions. That not just that they can eat, not just that they can, say to their friends or Kohen, oh, you got any extra meat, can I join you? No, they get their own portion of the meat. Tanya Idach, we have another brayso that says, Kol Zocher, again it says Kol Zocher B'Karanim, L'Rabbos Bali Mumin, to include Bali Mumin. Lemai, for what? Ilach, Ilare Kvar Omer, Ilachaluka Kvar Omer. We already had psukim to teach us that Bali Mumin can eat korbanos, that they get their own portions of the korbanos. So what's the third time around teaching us? Sheyachol Ainli Ele Tam V'Naise Bal Mum. I may have thought which Bali Mumin can eat korbanos and get their own portions. Bali Mumin that were born non-blemished. They were born healthy. I don't know if healthy is the right word. I feel like it's not the right word, but I don't know what the opposite of a blemished person is. A healthy person. An unblemished person. But then you get into like double negatives on it. I'd rather say healthy than unblemished. I'm going with healthy. Even though you can have a healthy, blemished person. So, I may have thought that only Bali Mumin who were born healthy and subsequently became Bali Mumin, they can take parts, get their own portions, eat korbanos. Bal Mumin Kar, but somebody who's born blemished, minayin, how do I know that even they receive portions and eat korbanos? Tamlomer Kol Zocher. Therefore, there's that second instance of Kol Zocher. Right? We had one instance. We had one pasuk that teaches that Bali Mumin can eat korbanos. Then we had one instance of Kol Zocher to say that they get their own portion. A second instance of Kol Zocher to say that this applies also to people born Bali Mumin. And finally, Tani Idach, we have a third instance of Kol Zocher. Kol Zocher l'Rabbos Bal Mum, to include a blemished person. Lamai, for what? Ilach, ilarik varom, vilach aluka arik varom, vilabal mum meikar arik varom. Well, we already learned that Baalei Mumin eat korbanos, receive portions of korbanos, and that it applies even to people born Baalei Mumin. Sheyocha, I may have thought, Ein li el Baal Mum kavua, Baal Mum over minayin. I may have thought that only people with only Baalei Mumin that have permanent blemishes, only they can eat korbanos, but people with temporary Baalei Mumin that are temporary Baalei Mumin, maybe I'm actually learning. I'm in Mishnayos in Bechoros. In Mishnayos in Bechoros, I'm actually learning about Baalei Mumin now, but I can't actually remember what a temporary Baal Mum would be. Maybe I'm getting up to that right now. Maybe it's talking the Mishnah I'm up to. I'm up to the last Mishnah in Perek Zayin of Masechta Bechoros. Masechta Bechoros, Perek Vav and Perek Zayin talk all about mums. Chevra, get ready. You still have time, probably about a year until then. But Daf 6 and 7 talk about mums, which is actually really interesting, right? Well, I don't know. The Gemara might actually be really technical, but we've been talking so much about mums, right? What are they? Well, Masechta Bechoros talks about mums. Now, okay, I don't know. I imagine like breaking a leg or something like that is probably a temporary mum. Now, so how do we know that even temporary mums, temporary Baalei Mumin, can eat korbanis? So that we have that third instance of kol zachar. Right, where am I? As Baalei Mumin kavua, Baalei Mumin over minayin. So Talmud Lomer kol zachar to say even temporary Baalei Mumin klapilai. 1 second, that makes no sense. I would think the opposite. I would think temporary Baalei Mumin can eat it. How do I know that even permanent Baalei Mumin can eat korbanos? Why are we saying even temporary Baalei Mumin? So Amar Rav Shesha says ipuch. Rav Shesha says taka. Switch it around. Say I would only know temporary Baalei Mumin. How do I even know permanent Baalei Mumin? Rav Ashi Amar says Rav Ashi lo tepuch. No. I'll explain to you why. Bisich sagadati chamina. Kitome. Maybe a temporary Baal Mum is like somebody who's tome. Ma tome kama de lo to or lo achol. Achil av I nami kama de lo miskan lo achil kamashman. I may have thought that, look, taka, a permanent Baal Mum, who is permanently a Baal Mum, we're saying that he can eat korbanos, but somebody who's a temporary Baal Mum, let's say, I assume like, let's say broke a leg or something. So temporarily he can't do the avoda, he can't eat the korbanos, whatever, but he'll heal, and then he will be able to. So while he's a Baal Mum temporarily, he won't participate, but later on he will participate. So no, we're saying even a temporary Baal Mum can eat korbanos, receive portions, etc. Kol she'eno roi v'chulei. Now, interestingly, the Mishnah then continued and said that anybody who is unfit to do avoda in the Beis HaMikdash or in the Mishkan does not receive a portion of the korbanos. What does the Mishnah say? Right after saying that Baalei Mumin receive portions and eat korbanos, it says Kol she'eino roi la'avoda. Anybody unfit for service, eino cholik b'basar, does not receive a portion of the meat. The obvious question is, says the Gemara, 1 second, v'lo v'arei Baal Mum. What do you literally just said that Baalei Mumin receive portions and eat the meat. Baalei Mumin don't do, they're unfit to do the avoda. They do receive portions, they do eat meat, and now you're saying anybody who's unfit to do the avoda does not receive. Ma pitom. We literally just said Baalei Mumin do. So v'lo v'arei Baalei Mumin to lo roi la'avoda v'cholik. Visu, and more so, Hara'ui la'avoda cholek. Now, should we also infer the opposite? If we're saying that somebody unfit does not receive, double negative, does that imply that somebody who's fit does receive? Hare tame, right? We saw this on Daf Tzadi Tes. So what about somebody who's tame, but korbanos tzibor, when it comes to public offerings, the chazi diroi la'avoda, right? A tame, right? Tumahucha b'tzibor, a tame kohen is allowed to do the service for a public offering, so he's allowed to do the service, and yet ve'enu cholik, he doesn't receive a portion, as we learned on Daf Tzadi Tes. So now the Gemara gives an interesting answer. It's a little tricky. I hope I understand it. Roi la'achila ka'amar. When we say that anybody unfit to do the service does not receive a portion, It means that in order to receive a portion, you have to be able to eat the korban. That's what it means. If you're unfit to, what does it say? It says, if you're unfit to do the service, really what it means is that you have to be able to eat the korban in order to receive a portion. And since a Baal Mum eats the korban, he receives a portion. But then if you're going to say that it's about being able to eat it, but as we learned also, we asked on Daf Tzadi Tes, what about a Kohen? A Kohen eats korbanis and yet he doesn't receive a portion, right? A minor, he can go with his father. It sounds like, I guess the point is he can go with his father to the Azara. His father could take him to the Azara and they can eat korbanis together. But he doesn't get his own portion. He would have to share it with his father. So, halo katoni. Okay, so the Gemara says, well, if I understand correctly, it's a little bit subtle, it's a little tricky. If I understand correctly, what it means is that the thing is, it didn't say that. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah had said, anybody unfit to do service in the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash does not receive a portion. Which we want to say, what that really means, it is to say that you have to be able to eat the korbanis right? You have to be able to eat the korbanis in order to receive a portion. Baalei Mumin eat korbanis, therefore they receive portions. Now you want to be medayek from that which isn't even explicitly written in the Mishnah to say, well, if you have to eat the korbanis, well, shouldn't that include therefore kitanim? The thing is, it didn't say it explicitly. All it really said was that people who are unfit to do the avoda cannot receive portions. We want to say that really what it means is that it's referring to people who can eat the korbanis, to include Baalei Mumin. But don't now come and make a deal from that which isn't even written explicitly in the Mishnah, which is really the implication of the Mishnah, but wasn't actually written explicitly. So again, halo katani, it didn't actually say in the Mishnah that people who can eat the korban receive a portion. It doesn't say it. If it did, then you can ask, what about Kohanim? What about Ketanim? But it doesn't explicitly say it. It's kind of like what's meant by what it did say, which is that people are unfit, cannot receive a portion. Anyways, now already that we're getting into these weeds, we'll say, you know what? It's like we initially said. You know what? Anybody unfit to do the avoda cannot receive a double portion. Portion. So it's a double negative. So it's a tricky few lines over here. Double negatives. Anyway, the double negative is that, so it's like we said initially, anybody unfit to do the avoda is unfit to receive a portion. Now we had two questions from that. Question number one, what about a Baal Mum? A Baal Mum is unfit to do the avoda, and yet he does receive a portion. Question number two, does that imply that somebody who is fit to do the avoda does receive a portion? What about Tameh people when it comes to public offerings? So now, imishum Tameh ha lo katani. The thing is, in terms of, shall we imply that anybody fit to do the avoda does receive a portion? What about Tameh people for korban asibut? Well, the Gemara says, the Mishnah doesn't say that. You might want to imply it, but the Mishnah doesn't say it. And says the Gemara, our suggestion is don't imply it. Meaning, what the Mishnah says is anybody unfit to do the avoda does not receive a portion. It does not say anything about anybody being fit to receive, anybody being fit to do the avoda receiving portions from which you would ask by the time. It doesn't say that. All it says is anybody unfit does not receive. Let's leave it at that. Don't infer things and then infer things from that which is inferred. Just leave it at what it says. Now, v'imishum Baal Mum, okay, now what it does say is that anybody unfit to do avoda does not receive a portion. Well, then what about a Baal Mum? Because there's no way of getting around that. It clearly says anybody unfit does not receive a portion. A Baal Mum is unfit and yet he receives a portion. That's pretty explicit. We're not talking about inferences. We're not talking about ketanim. We're not talking about Talmud people. Straight up, Baal Mum does not do the avoda, and yet he receives a portion. What do you do about that? Baal Mum Rachmana Rabbi, I'll tell you what I do about that. The Torah literally says that a Baal Mum receives a portion. The Torah literally says What does it say? It says Lechem elokov mikotche akotchim and akotchim yochel. It's literally in the parsha of Babble. It says the Torah explicitly says that they can eat korbanos, and then we learned out from kol zacha b'karanim. Not only do they eat korbanos, they receive portions as well. So don't ask about Babble. Babble we dealt with separately. Anybody else who's unfit to do avoda is unfit to receive a portion. Afilu tame b'shas zrikas damim v'tor b'shas hektar chalavim enucholik. The Mishnah had said that if somebody is tame during shas zrikas damim, i.e., let's say Tvul yom, right? Somebody who's tame during the day, zrikas adam, of course, is prior to shkia. Even if they will be tahor b'shas hektar chalavim, i.e., at night. So if they're tame during the day, even if they'll be tahor by that night, they don't receive a portion. But for the Gemara, what if it's flipped? Does that imply that the flip side is also true? That the inverse is also true? That hator b'shas zrikas damim, that if somebody is tahor during the day, but then becomes tamei, v'tamei b'shas hektar chalavim, and then that night they are tamei cholek, they would receive a portion. This therefore would mean that our Mishnah then is unlike Abashol, the standard that we learned in Brisa. Abashol almost says Abashol le'olam eino cholek. It says Ocha, but you could change it to Cholik. Achiei Tor Misha Zrika Acha Sektor Chalavim to Amar Kra Hamakriv as Dama Shlomim ve'es Achelev. That feel like to Chalavim Nami Boy. That Abishol's opinion is that a person must be, in order to receive a portion, the Kohen must be tahor throughout. Zrika Sadam during the day, Ektor Chalavim at night, he must be tahor during both stages. Fact the Gemara, Ashi asks, according to Abashol, then Nitma ben Taimau, what if he's tahor during the day and tahor at night, but he becomes tamei in the interim, in the middle? Right? Let's say maybe he's tahor during the day, but then maybe he touches a dead sheretz, goes to the mikveh, it's Tvul yom, comes the nighttime, now he is tahor again, right? So he was tahor during the day, he was tahor at night, but he did have a bout of tumah in the middle. Mao b'shas zriko v'shas aktara ba'inon v'oika. Do we say you just have to be tahor during the zrika sadam and during the aktaras emurim? And he was. Odilma ad shei tahor mishas zrika ve'ad shas ektar chalav. Maybe you have to be tahor the entire time. Teku, let's go weiter. Nu. So we see that Abishol's opinion is that you have to be tahor at the very least. It's unclear exactly what we say, so right, because we just asked, but you have to be tahor during the afternoon. You also have to be tahor right during the day. You also have to be tahor at night. Our Mishnah, we can infer from our Mishnah though that as long as you're right, that maybe if you're tahor during the day but tamei at night, maybe you would receive a portion. So we say that our Mishnah argues with Abashol. Okay, fine. And now we get up to the final section of today's daf. Tvul Yom's attempting to receive sacrifice portions. Kind of like a funny little thing. It's like I can imagine. I don't know. It seems like there's this Tvul Yom who knows that he's tamei right now, so he can't really receive his own portion of a sacrifice, like we learned in Daf Tzadi Tes. But he wants to, so he's trying to convince his friend who's a Kohen. He's like, hey, come on, can I get some of your sacrifice? Just give me some of your sacrifice. He's making all these arguments why he should be given part of the sacrifice, and it's not really working out. So it says Rava, but different sources say Rav, because this is a dialogue between Rav and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon. Rava would have been way later, but Rav could make sense. Rav says, Rav, Aidina, may Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, Gamirna, I learned the following from Elazar Reb Shimon to Omer Bebeis Hakise. Hitaka said this in the bathroom, and we will get back to that later. Done so that the halacha is, but Tvul Yom, that if a Tvul Yom comes, V'Omer, and he says to a fellow priest, Tein li mi minchas Yisrael, a Yisrael brought a korban mincha, and there's the shiaria mincha. Come on, I want some of that shiaria mincha. Ve'ochal, and I'll eat it. I'll eat it tonight. Now I can't eat it, but I'm a Tvul Yom. By tonight I'll be tahor. and I'll eat it then. Omar lo, and the Kohen says, Uma'im b'makom sheyofe kochacha b'chatoscha. Look, when it comes to korban chatas, that by korban chatas, if you, when you're tahor, were to bring a korban chatas, you can go just walk into the Beis HaMikdash, even if it's not your mishmar, because you're a Kohen. You can walk into the Beis HaMikdash, offer your own korban chatas, eat it, get the hide. Everything would belong to you. And yet, when it comes to a korban chatas of a Yisrael, dechisicha mechatas Yisrael, I'll say, no way, I'm not giving you any chatas Yisrael. So mokum shehura kochacha b'minchascha. So certainly when it comes to korban mincha, where if you were to come and offer a korban mincha, the korban mincha of a kohen is entirely burnt on the mizbeach. Kohanim don't receive any portion of it. Eino din sha'adichacha miminchas Yisrael. If by a korban chatos, where kind of is more lenient in some ways, kilo, you can come and offer your own chatas and get everything, right? And yet you don't get. I'm not giving you anything from korban chatas. Certainly, I have no reason to give you from a mincha, which is more stringent, which is a more stringent korban in that when you come to offer a mincha, you don't get any part of it, or you have to burn all of it on the mizbeach. To which the Tvul says, well, the thing is, I can understand why you'll say I don't get any part of a korban chatas, because, well, just like I can come in and offer everything myself and take everything myself, you can do the same thing. So you are also advantaged when it comes to a korban chatas. Tidcheni mimincha, but are you really going to push me off miminchas Yisrael? Shekeshem sheura kochi kachura kochacha. Just like I wouldn't get any portion from my own mincha, you wouldn't get any portion of your own mincha either, right? It's just as stringent for me as it is for you. So now give me some of that mincha. Amarle, to which the Kohen says, no. Harei Omer, the pasuk says, La Kohen hamakriv osa lotiye, that the shiori mincha goes to the Kohen who offers it. You know what? If you want it, go offer it yourself and get your own korban mincha. But you can't, because you're at Tvul Yom, get lost. And the Tvul Yom realizes that his negotiating position is not as strong as his counterparts. But, right, but come, hakrev, offer a mincha, ve'echol, and then eat it. But until you're going to do that, scram. Tein li mechatos Yisrael ve'ochal. If the Tvul Yom says to another kohen, he says, hey, you have a korban chatas there, come on, give me part of it. Omar lay, and the kohen says, Uma b'makom shehura kochi b'minchasi. If when it comes to a korban mincha, where I have a weaker relationship with the korban mincha. If I offer korban mincha, I can't have any of it at all. It's all burnt in the mizbeach, minchas koyanim. Dichisicha minchas Yisrael, and yet I'm saying you're not getting any korban mincha Yisraels. Makom she'yafe kochi bechatasi. If when it comes to korban chatas, where I have a stronger relationship with it, I can come in and offer it myself and keep it for myself. Eino din she'adichacha michatas Yisrael. Certainly, I am not giving you any chatas Yisraels. Omer lei, to which the Tvul Yom says, oh, come on. Umayim she dichisani mi minchas Yisrael. Okay, I understand why you are going to refuse me from a minchas Yisrael. Shekeshem shehura kochacha kachura kochi. Just like you have a weaker relationship with a mincha and that it's all burnt. Same thing with me. I also have a weaker relationship with a mincha. But guess what? Tidicheni mechatas Yisrael shekeshem sheyafe kochacha kach yafe kochi. Look, when it comes to achatas, just like you have a stronger relationship with it in that you can go in and offer it yourself and keep it, I can do the same thing. So therefore, give me some of the chatas. Hareu omer hakoina mechate oso yochalena ba chate ve'echol. Finally, the kohen says, look, the pasuk says that the kohen who does rikas adam gets to eat it. If you want it, come, do the avoda, eat it. You can't, you're Tvul Yom, scram. The Tvul Yom says to the Kohen, can you give me from the chazev ashok of a shlomim? I want to eat it tonight. This Kohen says, if when it comes to the chatas, where you have a stronger relationship with it, you can come, offer it when you're Torah, and nonetheless, dichi sichai pushed you off, michatas Yisrael, from taking from the meat of a chatas Yisrael. Certainly, when it comes to a korban shlamim, where you have a weaker position, by a korban shlamim, in best case scenario, you only receive the chaz of ashok, the breast and the thigh, no more than that. Certainly, I'm going to say get lost. To which he responds, the Tvul Yom says, okay, you pushed me off from a korban chatos, you can hura kochi, etzel noshav avodah. After all, I have a weaker position, weaker relationship with the chatos, and that I can't feed it to my wives, to my slaves, because it has to be eaten by zikre kahuna in the azara. Are you really going to try to push me away from chazav ashok of a shlamim sheken yafe kochi etzel noshav avodah? I can serve it to my wives, to my slaves, so therefore give me part of it. Hareyu omer lakoin azoikes dam shlamim lo yiyeh ba zrok ve'echol. To which the kohen says, look, if you want the chazav ashok, come and do the avodah yourself and get a chazav ashok. Scram. Yotza Tvul Yom kula v'chamurav al rosho. The Tvul Yom left with his kal v'chomers and his arguments on his head. Onin miyamino mechusik kapara mislum mismalo, joined by an onin to his right and a mechusik kapara to his left, all of which would theoretically make similar arguments that would not go anywhere. Parich Rav Achai asks, Lema le tain li mi bechor v'ocha. Why not? Why does Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon should also discuss this scenario that the Tvul Yom says, hey, give me some of a korban bechor that you're eating, and I'll eat it tonight, mishum da'amalei, because the kohen will respond, Uma b'makom shehura kochi b'chatos. If when it comes to chatos, we have a weaker position, etzel noshav avodah, in that I can't feed it to my wives and my slaves, dichisicho michatos yisrael, and I say, nonetheless, you're not having any chatos. Makom sheyafe kochi b'bechor, by bechor, where I have a stronger relationship with it. Dikule dili hi, I can have all of it, and I can feed it to whoever I want. Eino din sha'adel chacham imenu, that I'm going to say scram. Uma'im dichisani me chatos, to which the Tvul Yom says, yeah, okay, I understand why you can push me away from a chatos, because kashem shehura kochacha kachura kochi, just like you have a weaker position there in that you can't feed it to your wife, to your household, I also have that same weaker position. But tidicheni mi bechor, are you going to push me away from a bechor shekashem sheyafe kochacha kach yafe kochi, just like you by a bechor can have the whole thing, also I, when I'm tahor by a bechor, I can also have the whole thing, so give me some so that I can have some tonight. Haveru omer as domam tizrok al mizbeach veschelbom taktir v'sarim yelach ba zarok ve'echol, and the kohen would say to the Tvul Yom, if you want a bechor, get your own bechor. Otherwise, scram. The reason why Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon did not bring that case, ve'idach parich mi ksiv uvsarim lakohen azorek uvsarim yiyelach. No what? No, uvsarim yiyelach ksiv afilu kohen acher. It doesn't say that the meat necessarily goes to the one who does the zrikas adam. It says that the kohen that the meat will be to you. You could even be a different kohen, so potentially the Tvul Yom has an argument to be made there that the meat should perhaps go to him. So Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon did not bring that case. How could Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon be discussing these sugyas in the bathroom? You could think about Torah everywhere, but not in the bathhouse, not in the bathroom. They own so shiny. He couldn't help himself. What does Rashi say? He would think about Torah even against his will. He couldn't not think about Torah. He was just always thinking about Torah. So he thought about Torah wherever he was, even in the bathroom. It was all Torah all the time. Interesting. That was Daf 102 of Masechta Zevachim. On Daf 102 of Masechta Zevachim, we discussed whether Moshe was the high priest and or king. In terms of being king, it seems that he was the king. There was a question of would it go to his, right? He wanted it to be a dynasty, to go to his children as well, but that was not granted to him. But he seems to be referred to as a king, King Moshe. In terms of being the high priest, in terms of being a kohen at all, it is a machlokes. Blemished priests receiving sacrifice portions, we talked about how we know that they do receive, that they can eat korbanos, they can receive portions of korbanos, whether they were born with these mums, whether they receive them later, whether they are permanent, whether they are temporary. And at the end of the daf, we talked about Tvul Yoms attempting to receive sacrifice portions and trying to make arguments to say that, hey, come on, give me some korban so I can eat it tonight. But ultimately, his negotiating position is a weaker one, because the other Kohanim can just say, look, if you want, come and do the avodah yourself, but you can't. You're a Tvul Yom, scram. We saw a very interesting anecdote at the end there about how Reb Shimon would think about Torah in the bathroom because he couldn't not. And that seems to be acceptable. Very, very interesting thing there at the end. Peace.